Imagine sitting on a floating powder keg in the absolute dead of night. It is a pitch-black abyss where the cold water and the ink-black sky merge into a single, suffocating blanket of shadow. Beneath you, nearly 1,000 kilograms of specialized high-velocity explosives hum with a quiet, terrifying potential. This sleek machine costs less than a single luxury SUV or a modest apartment, yet it has the raw power to vaporize a $500 million guided missile cruiser in a blinding, instantaneous flash of light and heat. You are currently staring at a flickering monitor in a concrete bunker located hundreds of miles away from the salt spray, but your index finger holds the literal life and death of hundreds of sailors in its twitch. This is the brutal new reality of modern combat in the 21st century. It is a world where extreme numbers and massive disparities define the stakes. The sheer weight of the payload, the astronomical price of the failure, and the total irreversible destruction of the impact. You are the ghost in the machine now, a digital specter haunting the waves of a contested sea. This is the Sea Baby. For the Russian High Command and the admirals sitting in their guarded offices, this name has become a synonym for a recurring nightmare that simply refuses to end. It is a phantom that glides through the waves with a low profile that defies traditional surveillance. It is a whisper on the sonar that only becomes audible when it is far too late to launch a counter-response. To the rest of the world watching from the safety of their screens, this object is a fascinating mystery. A technological riddle wrapped in a sleek, matte black hull that looks more like a high-end racing boat than a weapon of mass destruction. But the Sea Baby is not just a drone or a remote-controlled boat. It is a profound symbol of national resistance. For the defenders of their coastline, it is a crown jewel, a physical manifestation of their collective ingenuity and their desperate will to survive against a much larger foe. It possesses a mystic, almost untouchable aura that makes it seem more like an unstoppable force of nature than a product of a hurried assembly line in a hidden workshop. It is a vessel designed specifically to prove a singular historical point, that even the mightiest giants can and will fall if hit in the right place at the right time. Today we are going deep behind the scenes of an operation that military minds and naval experts once considered a tactical and logistical impossibility. This is a story about a high-stakes heist of maritime dominance, a grand strategic gamble that risked everything on a single design, and a complex intelligence operation that would make a veteran spy novelist blush with envy. We are summarizing a plot that has fundamentally and permanently rewritten the rules of maritime engagement for every nation on Earth. It is a narrative built on three distinct and heavy pillars: the desperate, driving need for a technological edge in a time of crisis, the cold and calculated betrayal of centuries-old naval traditions, and the incredible, nerves-of-steel courage required to launch a weapon into the very heart of a global empire. We are looking at an operation that was birthed in the fires of extreme urgency and executed with a mechanical precision that defied every conventional expectation. This is a story where every single decision was a heartbeat away from total, crushing catastrophe. To truly understand why this immense risk was taken, we must first confront the bitter irony of the historical context that led to this moment. A decade ago, the situation in these waters was a perfect mirror image of what we see today. The very nation that is now deploying these lethal, autonomous drones once possessed a significant and proud traditional fleet of its own. They had frigates, patrol boats, and a maritime history that commanded respect. But when the geopolitical tides turned suddenly and the occupation of the peninsula began, they were stripped of their ships, their ports, and their dignity on the water in a matter of days. They were left with nothing but the sand on the shoreline and the memories of a lost navy. Russia looked out from the fortified port of Sevastopol and saw what they believed was a private lake where they could operate with total, arrogant impunity. They thought the sea was theirs forever. But history has a cruel way of twisting the knife when you least expect it. The total absence of a traditional fleet did not lead to surrender. Instead, it forced a radical, hyper-accelerated evolution. Today, the superpower that once mocked its neighbor for having no navy is the one that is terrified to leave the safety of the harbor. The hunter has truly become the prey. This unprecedented transformation required a human factor that was entirely unconventional and outside the box of military recruitment. They did not need traditional sailors who had spent decades reading paper charts or weathered captains who understood the nuances of traditional naval maneuvers. Instead, the commanders sought out individuals with a completely different psychological profile. They needed hackers, software engineers, and young people who had grown up mastering complex digital environments, high-speed gaming, and low-latency systems. The motivation for these recruits was not found in a massive paycheck or a promise of glory, although the resources poured into the project were vast. It was found in a deep moral obligation to protect a home that was under constant threat. The recruitment offer was a golden ticket to the absolute cutting edge of modern warfare, but it looked like a literal death sentence to anyone who truly understood the physical and political risks involved. These individuals became the anonymous architects of a whole new era, trading their personal safety and their privacy for a chance to strike a powerful symbolic blow against an overwhelming force. They were not fighting for medals or parades, they were fighting for the very right to exist. The plan for the operation against the bridge and the fleet was deceptively simple in its concept, but it was essentially a suicidal endeavor in its execution. The drones had to navigate a terrifying gauntlet of electronic warfare, physical barriers, and constant aerial surveillance. They had to find the radar dead zones, those narrow, shifting paths through the crashing waves where traditional sensors were blind to small, low-profile objects made of composite materials. Every nautical mile traveled was a grueling test of the satellite data link and the endurance of the overworked engines. The operators pushed the machines to their absolute mechanical limits on the water, creating a wake that was engineered to be almost invisible to the naked eye. This was the point of no return. As the target finally appeared as a jagged silhouette on the dark horizon, the operators in their distant bunkers knew that in 30 minutes, they would either be celebrated as the architects of a tactical genius, or they would simply become another forgotten memory of a failed, expensive attempt. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as the boats raced toward their historic and explosive destiny. As the drones reached the final approach and the sound of the engines echoed off the steel pillars of the target, the grand twist of the operation was finally revealed, leaving the defenders in a state of total, paralyzed shock. The expectations of the Russian military were rooted deeply in the tactics of the past century. They expected a predictable, linear attack that they could easily counter with traditional missiles, heavy machine gun fire, and spotlights. But they had failed to account for a critical secret evolution in the drone's onboard programming. These machines were not just being steered by a human, they were communicating with one another in a sophisticated, localized network. When the first drone was engaged by defensive fire, the others did not scatter in fear. They adapted their trajectories in real time based on the incoming fire. They utilized a swarm intelligence that identified the gaps in the defensive perimeter, moving like a pack of wolves in the dark. It was a Trojan horse for the digital age. By the time the local commanders realized that the primary threat was coming from a completely unexpected direction and at an angle they hadn't covered, it was already too late to turn the guns. The sea had changed its nature in an instant. The cold reality that followed the thunderous explosion was devastating for the prestige of the Kremlin. Their immediate forensic investigation revealed a truth that was even more painful than the physical damage. Their opponent had been at least 3 steps ahead from the very first day of the project. Every expensive defensive measure they had installed, every patrol route they had carefully established, and every encrypted communication they had sent had been intercepted, factored into the drone's pathing, and bypassed. The opponent knew the exact coffee break schedule of the guards and the specific blind spots of the rotating radar sweeps. The reality was that the mighty Black Sea Fleet, once the pride of an empire, was being systematically outmaneuvered and dismantled by a small team operating out of nondescript warehouses using modified consumer electronics. Every word of the Russian defensive doctrine had been dictated by an old, rigid way of thinking that was now completely obsolete. Every target had already been marked by the software long before the drones had even been lowered into the water. The old era of naval dominance through sheer size was officially dead and buried. In the end, we must realize that a machine is only as loyal and effective as the human heart that controls its soul. The greatest lesson of this entire conflict is that the most powerful weapon in any modern arsenal is not a multi-billion-dollar nuclear aircraft carrier or a massive armored destroyer. The true weapon is the human capacity for radical innovation under the most extreme pressure imaginable. It is the ability to take the scattered debris of a broken navy and forge it into a sharp, digital spear that can pierce the heart of a nuclear superpower. The rules of war have been rewritten, not by a nation with the most money, but by a nation with the most adaptable mind. As we look at the smoking wreckage of the old world order, we see a future where innovation is the only real defense against the giants of the past. This story proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that truth, grit, and code are the ultimate weapons of the new age. Write your tactical analysis in the comments. We'll see you in the next deep dive. Stay sharp.